In the heart of the night, this world will burn bright. We will set it alight. In the heart of the night, in the heart of the night, this world will burn bright. We will set it alight. In the heart of the night.
Hello everyone, I'm Anthropomantic Fiend and I do horror-related things on the internet. So, October's over and Halloween is over and I'm definitely feeling it right now. I'm absolutely exhausted and trying to figure out what to do with my life. And I guess just what I have been doing, which is, playing music and doing these movie reviews. So, I'm gonna continue the Howling thing and do the Howling 2, or rather just Howling 2, Your Sister Is A Werewolf. And I wonder why they used that as the subtitle, because it's said maybe twice in the movie and then not really brought up a lot again. But I guess that's sort of the starting plot point of the movie. So it's a sequel to The Howling, and I think it's actually based on the sequel to the novel. And I haven't read the novel or that yet, so I can't really say how it compares, but I really enjoyed this movie. I don't think it was a better movie than the first Howling, but I enjoyed it just as much, just for some very different reasons, although there were parts of this movie that were very quality. There was a bunch of ridiculous stuff, too. So, Howling 2 came out in 1986. It stars a bunch of different people, but the only one that really stood out to me was, of course, Christopher Lee, who is one of my favorite actors of all time, if not my favorite. I think he's like neck and neck with Christopher Lee as Christopher Lee is neck and neck with Vincent Price for my favorite actor. But anyway, Christopher Lee is in this movie. I'm blanking on all the other actors and actresses' names, but Christopher Lee kind of overshadowed all of that for me. But I enjoyed all the acting in this movie, almost all of the acting in this movie, I should say, because with most of the acting, the good acting is great. Christopher Lee, for example, really lends his air to the movie. When he's in it, it really does feel like a slightly more modern Hammer film, really. He's playing one of the good guys, sort of, actually a very similar character to the one that he plays in The Devil Rides Out. Christopher Lee is fantastic, and there are some other actors who do their parts very well, and the sort of bad, cheesy acting is very entertaining to watch. And I didn't really have a problem with any of the characters except for our main character. I forget his name, but he's the brother of the woman from the original Howling, the main character from the original Howling, the one who, turns into a werewolf at the end and gets shot. Spoiler alert. But if you're watching a review of The Howling 2, I'm assuming you've watched The Howling 1, and that was spoilers all the way through. I'm actually going to do a spoilers section for this review, because there was just some glorious ridiculousness that I don't want to spoil for you, that I think you really need to experience for yourself. But anyway, the only character that I didn't really like was, the brother. He just kind of had no likable qualities to him. He was just kind of a guy who, when showed a tape by Christopher Lee's character of his sister's death, he was like, yeah, that's fake, I don't believe in werewolves. And he's just sort of making all these demeaning remarks to everybody he meets, and he's just kind of this sort of one-dimensional dude. And they're kind of going for this sort of world-hardened tough guy who's making sort of snarky remarks to everybody, but he just comes off as a jerk. I really didn't like him. All the other characters I kind of liked, although his love interest was also kind of bland and didn't have a lot to do. But everybody else I thoroughly enjoyed in this movie. They were either just really good actors or really entertaining. As I said before, Christopher Lee is great. The movie literally opens with him narrating a bit. I think he's reading a passage out of the Bible, something dark and apocalyptic from Revelations or something. I appreciated that. Another thing I appreciated was the soundtrack. And this movie had a much more sort of 80s synth-based soundtrack than the original movie, which had a much more straight-laced, traditional sort of symphonic score. It still has the pipe organ in it in places, but it's much more sort of 80s synth-based. And then they've got the sort of Howling song by, I believe the band is called Babel, but they're like a new wave. They're listed in the credits as a punk band, but they're totally a new wave band. And there's just this one scene in the movie where they're playing in a club, and it's like pure 80s alternative. They're dressed like a new wave band would in like suit and tie with sunglasses. One of them's got a guitar, and there's just this huge sea of punk rockers around them, and they're playing this extremely 80s song about, I think it's just called Howling, but it's just sort of using, werewolves as a metaphor for, infatuation with somebody, and it's a lot of fun. I loved the club because it's got all of these names scrawled all over the walls, and I was just picking out a bunch of my favorite bands, like just all kinds of like 80s punk and goth and new wave bands all over the walls. I think I saw like Specimen, I saw Batcave, the Batcave Club, I saw the Cramps, I saw GBH, Alien Sex Fiends, just a bunch of different, did I say the Cramps? I think I saw the Cramps, but a bunch of different bands that I really enjoy from the 80s, just written all over the walls, giving it that very 80s feel that dates the movie, but also increases its enjoyability for me that much more. That's where a few of the werewolves there hang out, and Christopher Lee's character goes in there to investigate, and there's a bit where he puts on like these sort of new wavy sci-fi sunglasses. If you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about, and it's just like amazing. I never thought I'd see Christopher Lee like that, but that sort of image is a perfect metaphor for why I like this movie. It's like Hammer horror meets, I don't know, Return of the Living Dead or something. You've got that sort of super 80s rock feeling combined with the gothic feel of the Howling or like a Hammer film, and I love it so much. You can't take it seriously, but I wasn't trying to because I had heard this movie's a bit ridiculous. Christopher Lee's not too proud of it. I believe he said that the less said about this movie, the better, but I still loved him in it. That's the soundtrack and just sort of the whole rock aspect, although I will say the Howling theme, I think they overuse it a bit. I think if they just, it was like awesome the first couple times they did it, but I think it would be a lot more effective if they minimized the use of it. It would just, when it kicked in, it would be that much more awesome if you just sort of kept people waiting for it a little bit more. On the acting side of that thing, you've got sort of your sort of random punk characters who've got that sort of over-the-top 80s jerk thing going on. There's some spoiler stuff related to them, but you see them for a little bit in the punk club, and they're the epitome of the wonderful over-the-top aspect of some of the acting in this movie. I loved them. Stirba, the sort of werewolf queen in Transylvania. Yes, they go to Transylvania. I'll get to that in a bit. But Stirba, I forget the actress. She has scenes where she plays it very straight and does it very well, but as the movie progresses, she just gets more and more over the top with it, and it just gets more and more enjoyable. And I'll get to some of those especially insane scenes in spoiler section, but I'll just say she was just the perfect kind of crazy for this movie, and I really enjoyed that. The effects range from pretty good to stupid in the best way possible in this movie. I'll get to some of the some of both of those things. I'll just say that there's hand-drawn visual effects that look super, super dated and not realistic at all, but they were still sort of fun to see, sort of on-screen glowing magic things that were clearly hand-drawn in, but are still kind of cool to look at. There are gore effects that are very obviously fake, but in that way that is super fun to watch. There's the wolf transformations, which are more or less comprised of a character sort of contorting their face and about to go into it, and then like a few shots of wolf transformation that I think they stole from the first movie, just as stock footage, and then it'll cut back to the person in wolf form. And I think that wolf makeup actually looks really good, but it's clearly on a budget at the same time. It doesn't look as great as it did in the first movie, but I wasn't expecting it to. All things considering, I liked it. Story starts off really good and then kind of turns into this muddle of weird scenes at the end, but at that point I didn't care. I was enjoying myself too much. If you're expecting a good plot, watch the first half of the movie before they go to Transylvania, and then just kind of decide what happens for yourself, or maybe read the book. Maybe the book story is better. There were some cool story things in Transylvania, but there were also just kind of some weird things that didn't make a lot of sense and weren't really explained, but they were still fun. And there were some sort of little aspects of the werewolf mythology that were confusing but also interesting. Like, apparently werewolves, there are certain werewolves who are immune to silver for some reason. They don't really tell you why. It's just like, oh, these wolves are immune. There's this certain breed who are immune to silver and can only be killed by titanium. And it's like, okay, why? Because it doesn't really come up as much of a plot point. And then there's just sort of aspects of vampirism that are sort of not... I'm getting it backwards again. Aspects of the werewolves that are a bit like vampirism. For example, in the old Universal movies, and I think in actual folklore, if you remove the stake after staking a vampire, it's been set free and can come back again. And the same with this, because the silver bullets have been removed from this woman in the autopsy, and she comes back for a moment before Christopher Lee actually stakes her with a silver stake that's been, like, anointed with holy water or something. It didn't totally make sense to me either, because he's got, like, a titanium dagger that he stabs some of the wolves with, but if he keeps the dagger with him, then the metal isn't in the wolf anymore, and couldn't it technically come back? But logic kind of goes out the window, and explanation even more so as the movie progresses, so I just went with the madness. Cinematography and set design were actually still great. Like I said, I loved the Punk Club, but I got the Transylvania set, which has got this huge atmospheric castle. Back in America, there's a cemetery set that's shrouded in fog and looks gorgeous. Those set pieces felt straight out of like a Hammer Dracula movie, and I loved them. But that was sort of juxtaposed with the 80s punk vibe, and that is 200% my aesthetic, like hard rock stuff mixed with elegant gothic horror. So I was all for it, even though it was very ridiculous. I like ridiculous, if that wasn't completely apparent by this point. This movie is sort of steeped in gothic horror cliches to the point that it's ridiculous, because they literally go to Transylvania. You've got all these sort of weird vampire aspects. I think the main guy's love interest brings along garlic. Did I even mention what the story is? I should mention what the story is. I kind of forgot that with the first review as well, but I sort of said it was good, but then went off the rails. But the actual story is, like I said, Christopher Lee plays this sort of occult researcher and non-professional werewolf hunter who, following the funeral of the character from the first Howling, forgetting her name, they find the brother. This is somebody who he's working with. It's not really clear what their relationship is. They seem to just sort of be, I think she's actually like a news reporter, although they barely sort of mention that at the beginning. And he's just a guy who's the brother of the woman from the original Howling. And they are approached by him and told about the whole werewolf thing, how she was a werewolf, and how there are other werewolves who are trying to bring her back and recruit her to their legion, and it's his mission to hunt them down. And the more you analyze this story, though, the less sense it makes. So following that whole thing, he's just like, it's my goal. So this other werewolf woman who they've already had an encounter with is going to Transylvania, to the land of the shadows, to convene with the ruler of the werewolves, Stirba, who's trying to bring about sort of, I don't know, the wolf apocalypse or something. I don't even know. Just bring out about this full wolf transformation. Even though the woman becomes at peace, he's like, you guys need to come with me and stop Stirba. And they agree, I guess, maybe out of vengeance for her. It's kind of weird, but anyway, then that happens, and then they're in Transylvania, and then the plot just goes completely off the rails. Sorry about that, but anyway, they go to Transylvania, and things get weird. So, for talking about when things get weird, I'll go to spoilers in just a sec. I'll just say, if you're looking for a movie to take seriously, this movie is not for you. If you're looking for a wonderfully absurd werewolf movie and you can handle some really weird erotic stuff around the end, then by all means, this is your movie. I really liked it and I highly recommend it. I'm going to be reviewing the Howling movies up through the 4th one coming up. Tell me if you want me to go beyond that. I'm definitely going to watch the other ones. I just don't know if I'll review them for the channel. But, so, spoilers. The very first kill in this movie are the sort of random punk characters who I was telling you about before. This werewolf woman who is at the punk bar lures them, or the punk club lures them to her sort of hideaway, which seems to be some old warehouse, and they think that they're going to have sex with her. Then she calls her other wolf friends and they kill them, and they just sort of get gorily mutilated while the Howling song plays in the background, and it's absolutely glorious. I loved that part. Then there's the weird erotic stuff I mentioned before. There's these completely, like, no context weird wolf sex scenes in the middle of the movie, and it's not that I didn't think they were entertaining. It's just that the actors and actresses involved were pretty much entirely nude, but also had like wolf makeup covering their whole bodies, and oh my god, that had to have been uncomfortable. And having to undergo something agonizing for a scene that didn't really even have that much of a point in the movie, just wow. I don't think they had to do that, but I sort of admire their dedication that they did. But yeah, those scenes are weird. I don't think they have a point. There's like one regular sex scene that comes out of nowhere and is very short, but doesn't really have much of a point either. It's between like the main character and the reporter who comes along, and it's just sort of happens, and they are just, like I've said before, they're kind of forgettable, even though they're like supposed to be sort of the central part of the film. Honestly, if this had been a separate story just about Christopher Lee taking on a bunch of werewolves, I wouldn't have had a problem with that at all. And then you've got all the other stuff that happens in the castle. The guy and his one assistant, who's, you know, he's a midget. The two of them are going to the castle to break in, and they've got these earplugs made of like sacred candle wax, and one of them falls out, and Stirba's chanting something when it happens, and his face basically explodes from the inside out. It's super fakey, but like his face literally, like, blood shoots out of his eyes, and it's so dumb, and she like floats down and her like cape is glowing with all these effects, and it's really confusing, but it was wonderful. The outfit that Stirba is wearing, what is that? It doesn't really make any sense for her, and she's got like these big 80s sunglasses that she's wearing and this sort of weird armor. I thought it looked awesome, but also why? Then there's all kinds of weird wolfy things happening around her throne, weird erotic wolfy things, while it sort of cuts back to scenes of the punk club, and visually it was awesome, but it just didn't make any sense. I am a broken record right now because that's a lot of the movie. And then there's the finale where this other guy break into the castle and then tries to cut up Stirba, and she's got this big staff with a dragon or a gargoyle on the end of it, and it zooms at his face and rips it to pieces with this wonderfully absurd gore effect going on, and I loved that. And it's still sort of sitting in his face around the end while Christopher Lee and Stirba are fighting. Apparently they're like brother and sister, but they don't really explain it. They just sort of are chanting things at each other mentally and just sort of having this Van Helsing Dracula battle of the minds, and then they both go up in flames. It didn't make a lot of sense, but I loved watching it. And sort of at the same time, the staff is sort of poking its head out of this guy's mouth and watching them as everything goes up in flames, and I thought that was highly enjoyable. And then comes the after credits scene. If you've seen this before, you know what I'm talking about, because there's this one topless shot of, I believe her name is Sybil Danning. It just came back to me, Stirba's name, but yeah, there's just this one topless shot of the movie that they just show over and over and over as they play the Howling theme. They just interspersed with a bunch of other shots. So they just play that one over and over and over and over and over and over and over. And I think I just watched an interview about it. I think it was either a director or the editor or somebody, but I don't know. But Sybil Danning hated it. Everybody else was like, what the hell is that? And he thought it was fine. I had no problem with the shot being in there once, but by like the 6th time or even like the 4th time, I was like, just stop. It just got really, really annoying, and it was just like, this is one super perverted editor. But end of credits sequence that got kind of annoying, but the actual movie itself was overall pretty solid. Oh yeah, I almost forgot about the twist ending. The twist ending is so dumb, and I love it, because everything else is basically done. The brother and the reporter are both getting trick-or-treaters on Halloween, and this one guy who's just a werewolf knocks on the door, and they give him candy, and he just sort of whimpers and walks away, and then they go over to the house beside them, and there's like this priest living inside with this super thick accent, and they're like, your kid just knocked on our door, and he's just like, but I am not married, and it's just so ridiculous. You see the twist coming a mile away, and you're just like, why was that even there? But it's just wonderfully entertaining to watch. So, weird choices, lots of goofiness, but it's an amazing looking movie, and it's a really fun one, and Christopher Lee's in it, so I can't think of any better reasons to watch this movie. So, please go and watch The Howling 2, and watch The Howling 1 while you're at it if you haven't already. But yeah, that's my review of this. I'm going to be reviewing the other Howling movies in the near future, so I hope you check those out. Thanks for checking this video out. Hope you had a great October, and you're going to have a great November. So I'm rambling now, so I'll stop. Thanks for watching. Bye.